Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me, and this is our Friday weekend edition, and this is going to be just incredibly packed with information. But, of course, we're heading into the Memorial Day weekend, so we're going to be talking about Memorial Day and the cross up in Maryland, the Bladensburg Cross. But, of course, this is also a time in which we have graduations. And I first started coming on the show with Marlon, I think, in 1980, and I started being the host in 1986, and it seems like now, what is it? That'd be 32 years. I just know that whether it's May or June, we're going to have some situation with a valedictorian speech or a baccalaureate or something, and we've got one of those today to talk about. So there's lots of issues that we will cover, and we have in the studio with us, as we oftentimes do, Kelly Shackelford of First Liberty, and also Debbie Georgatos, a talk show host, author of Ladies Can We Talk, and of course the talk show America Can We Talk. And so, Kelly, let me put you on the spot. Here we go again. This is getting to be really frustrating. These school officials do not seem to understand that a young person who is a student, who's not affiliated with a school, should have the freedom to say what he or she would want to say in a valedictorian speech. And here we go up to Illinois and find out that in their wisdom, they said, no, you can't do that. Tell us the story.
Well, you've got a co-valedictorian, a young man, Sam Blackledge, that, had great grades, earned his right. And, a valedictorian address, it means a personal farewell. I mean, everybody, I think, remembers that the valedictorian gives a speech that's their own personal address. And Sam was about to go on, and 2 hours before he was going to give his speech, they came to him and said that they were going to censor his speech unless he removed Christ out of the speech. And so he was just, in shock. I mean, here's a good kid, good grades, done everything right, and all of a sudden he's in the middle of a controversy, at the biggest stage of his life. So they really ruined his graduation and what he had to go through. And, and what I really think is they taught exactly the wrong lesson. I mean, the whole point of schools is to train these young people so they can be great citizens. And I think having the valedictorian and other students speak at graduation is a great way to kind of move them into being adults and citizens. And the idea of coming in and censoring his speech by the government is exactly the opposite of what, we don't want our students coming out into becoming citizens and participants in our government and teaching them, oh, yeah, one of the last things we want you to know is whatever the government tells you what you can say is what you can say. That's not how citizens should be trained in this country. And so we are now, we've sent a demand letter to the school. We want to make sure his graduation is over.
Yes.
But at least he can and we can make sure that we get a policy if the school district will comply voluntarily. If not, we'll have to do things a different way. But so that this won't happen to anyone else. Right. And so that's what we're trying to do at this point. But this happens every year. And in fact, those who hadn't had graduations, if there's a problem, call us beforehand. I mean, Sam didn't have enough time.
Right.
And we can hopefully get this rectified beforehand. But the basics are you have a right to free speech. You've been given a right to give a speech. Now, can you, as a student, do you have the right to say something lewd or profane? No. But outside of that, you have every right to express your opinion. and to mention your faith. And the government cannot censor your speech or punish you or threaten you because you're going to do that. And that's just basic free speech, free exercise. It's the First Amendment.
You know, I've got two lawyers here today. Kelly Shackelford, graduate of Baylor Law School, and, of course, Debbie Georgatos, graduate of the Georgetown Law School. And I never went to law school, but I did study a lot of it when I went to Georgetown in graduate school. And I think there was this case called Tinker versus Des Moines. And I think even Kelly Shackelford has a booklet that he put together after he gave a speech before the Supreme Court. Don't students still get their rights when they walk through the schoolhouse gate?
They absolutely do, and I love that we bring this up probably 2 months before graduation time. Maybe that's what you do, probably at First Liberty, say, hey, warning, these are coming up. These are things you should know about. But, you know, I think it's so interesting about this case is the school was comfortable shutting down this speech because it was Christian speech, and I think that's particularly under fire in America today. The idea of advocating openly for your faith, explaining, he wanted, from what I read about the case, he just wanted to share in his speech how much Christ meant to him, how it led him to be a strong student, a good citizen. And my lawyer head goes off on hypotheticals, but if this speech had, for example, included a student's advocacy for the pro-choice position or some other thing which is politically more acceptable and popular, and then would the school have done that? I mean, I just am getting at this First Amendment. They're especially cracking down when it relates to expressing your Christian faith.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And I think everybody's heard a valedictory address on some political,
of course.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody should understand. Yeah, I think everybody knows it's an ability of that person to express their own beliefs about whatever they think is important as they go off into the world. The idea that, you can do that, but you can't mention Christ. I mean, that's just a violation of the First Amendment in all kinds of different ways. So, again, I would encourage people, if they know of anybody that has these problems, they know a valedictorian or somebody who's even just given the ability to make the opening and closing, call us at First Liberty if you have any of these problems or if you just have questions, because I hate what happened to Sam. I mean, he can't get that back now, and I'd like to be able to get this beforehand, but hopefully we can at least maybe get a policy in place so that this doesn't happen in the future.
I might just mention we'll come back to this in the next hour. For those of you listening now, we will certainly want to open up for some phone calls, but we first of all have this article by Todd Starnes about school censors valedictorian speech. People that listened to us on Wednesday, we had Lathan Watts in here, and he actually put together a hypothetical speech in which not only he, but two of the other individuals that you've represented in the past, one of them, I think Monica, wasn't her name? Or something like that actually did a
Monica
video.
Bridges. You've got Mariah Bridges.
Mariah, I got the name wrong. And so you've got that. And then I think, if I remember right, Sam has made his speech available if people wanted to get that. So
it was.
So there's just a lot of resources out there, and I just thought I'd mention that again for our listeners now in Texas and Minnesota that are listening to this broadcast.
I remember it was probably 15 or 20 years ago. I just think of how many of these we have.
Yes. 15
or 20 years ago, I'm sitting in Dallas. I think it was DeSoto was the school district that we had. We had a very similar situation. They threatened the young lady, and we had to come in and say, we're going to give you a day because the graduation's coming up in 2 days. And they backed down. They let her give her valedictory address. But we have one of these pretty much every year. And it's a shame because it shouldn't be happening to kids. Because, the one you hear about is one of maybe 100 that you don't hear about. And so hopefully with enough point of view listeners, around the country, we will get the word out and people can know that, they need to teach the kids the right lesson about what freedoms they have in this country under the First Amendment.
We'll come back to this, but I just thought some of the people that I've run into have said, well, what happened? And you're at the demand letter stage, right? You're not filing a lawsuit or anything like that.
Yeah, we always try to see if we can work it out before we file the lawsuit, but we'll see what they want to do.
We'll keep following that, and if there's some other ones service, you'll hear about those as well. Let's take a break. We're coming up to Memorial Day weekend, and there are some reasons why that's an issue as well. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one of the many dividing lines between progressives and conservatives is their belief in the efficiency and effectiveness of government bureaucracies. Liberals may have some misgivings about how they are treated at the Department of Motor Vehicles or by the TSA at airports. Nevertheless, they tend to believe that government is the solution to most social and political problems. Conservatives are usually more skeptical about government and support the private sector over the public sector, but their reactions seem tempered by the fact that they generally have high respect for people in the military and law enforcement. It's this difference in perspective concerning federal bureaucracies that shows up in many debates, including the current one about vetting refugees and other immigrants. In a recent column, Kevin Williamson asked, "Who seriously thinks that our public institutions are up to the job of properly investigating tens of thousands of refugees, asylum seekers, and ordinary immigrants every year? If Donald Trump's temporary order seems to you unreasonable, ask yourself what the next best option is and how much confidence we should have in it." When I read or hear someone assure us that the government screening of refugees and immigrants is very effective, I want to ask them some questions. Have you been to the DMV or the VA recently? Have you visited an immigration office recently? Sometimes you find a well-run organization, but far too often you probably walked out of a government building shaking your head because it was hardly run efficiently and effectively. Add to this the reality that the information from some of these countries for these refugees and immigrants is sketchy at best. That is why I think some are more trusting of the federal bureaucracy than is warranted. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition, but also as we look ahead to Memorial Day weekend, we're going to come back a little bit later as we have the national audience with us and really encourage some of you that have served. We want to honor you today, and we want to honor veterans and recognize that this is a very important Memorial Day weekend for lots of reasons, but one of those has to do with the Bladensburg Cross, which is in Maryland. Now, if you've lived in Washington, D.C., and of course, two of us here went to Georgetown, so we know what that's like. You know, there is a road that takes you from Annapolis all the way to Washington, D.C. And there are some memorials there, and one of those is a cross that was put up in World War I. We'll let Kelly get into more detail. But, Kelly, you have been saying on some of your Twitter posts, which I do want to talk about, and we'll try to post some of them on pointofview.net, that this could be the last Memorial Day ceremony at the Bladensburg Cross. Tell us why.
It's a chilling thought. This memorial was put up 100 years ago. It's been up for 100 years. It was put up in part by money from mothers who lost their sons in World War I and the American Legion as well. And they picked a cross because that's what they saw across the fields with all the graves, and they called it a peace cross. And it obviously wasn't for even one religion. It was just representing the sacrifice. And if you look at it, it's actually the same symbol that's used all throughout Europe for World War I memorial. I mean, essentially that's what it says.
Of course.
And it sat there, and it was private. It's on private property. And what happened is, 40 years ago or so, they needed a highway. And so they used eminent domain to take private land to build the highway. And, of course, they looked at that and they said, well, we're not touching that. I mean, that's a memorial. That's like a gravestone. And so they had the road go around the memorial, not, they didn't tear the memorial down. And so it sat there again for many years. And now the American Humanists have brought a lawsuit. They've said, oh, you can't have a cross, a memorial that's in the shape of a cross on government land. And we went to the Federal Court of Appeals, and we had 2 Obama appointees and 1 Clinton appointee. And one of the Obama appointees in the oral argument said, well, what about if we just cut the arms off the cross? Won't that take care of any problems?
It just fries me every time I hear that.
We knew,
Yeah.
we knew when that question came out that we've got some problems coming ahead, I think. And sure enough, the Clinton appointee ruled our way and said, well, the Obama appointees both said this is unconstitutional. So after 100 years, you're going to tear down this memorial, which is just unthinkable. The Clinton appointee wrote a very, I thought, excellent dissent and said, this is outrageous. Of course we don't tear this down. And so here we are. Now, that would be bad enough, and we'll talk about Bladensburg more, but the Fourth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals that issued this opinion, within its district is also Arlington National Cemetery. And what they said in this opinion is a large freestanding cross on government property is not allowed. And that would mean that they would have to go into Arlington and tear down the large freestanding crosses that are there. They say in their opinion, oh, this won't affect the headstones in Arlington because those are picked out by individuals. There's not just headstones in Arlington. There's the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice. It's like 20 feet tall. There's the Argonne Cross. There's the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier that says known but to God. This precedent would not only tear down the Bladensburg Memorial, but it would have them pulling bulldozers into Arlington. So we're about to file this in the next couple of months before the U.S. Supreme Court. And so what these memes and things on our Twitter account, and people can go to First Liberty Institute's Twitter account, these are the best I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
They really are moving. My favorite, everybody has their own favorite, is the one with the old World War I soldier picture, and he's standing in a field of poppies, and it says the dead can't speak for themselves. You share that, you're going to get some conversation going because it's a powerful meme. And there are other ones, too, that are excellent. And there'll be a video coming out this weekend on the background, the history, that's really powerful. So I would encourage people, I know you guys will have it at Point of View, and then go to Point of View.
Sure. Or First Liberty,
or
either way.
First Liberty.
Both there.
But take these, go to the Facebook page and share, or go to the Twitter and share these memes with other people. It's a great way to focus on Memorial Day, and it's unthinkable, but this might be the last Memorial Day for this memorial that's been up 100 years if the Supreme Court doesn't take this and reverse it.
One thought I have about all this is, and we've talked about this case before in the show, and one time, and in my show too, but at one time you made this comment about the Arlington National Cemetery and everyone's vision of that. You just see the sea of crosses, and when somehow this distinction they've made, this court has made, Fourth Circuit. Fourth Circuit was, that a big cross is bad, but a small cross, well, they can put up with that. and they weren't all chosen by families, and that's kind of what almost everybody, some were if they had a family. My point is that there's just, this is a great case that should go to the Supreme Court. It's a great case to share with your friends about the antagonism in even our American court system against an expression of faith. And this is bigger than, this is a huge case. This Bladensburg cross is a huge case. But the movement in America to erase the sense of God in America, God in the founding, God is the Judeo-Christian values that were the founding of America. The effort of the left is not just that cross, that memorial, that speech. It is to drive out of American society the notion that our goodness, our greatness, our uniqueness came from the Judeo-Christian culture that was in the midst of our founding. That God in the midst of our founding is exactly what groups like this, whatever this one was, Atheists United, whoever they were, are trying to say is God has nothing to do with America's greatness, and that is blatantly false, and they need to have Christians and believers of every faith, or even people who aren't so antagonistic to religion, speaking up and saying, no, this is not what America is all about. We are not about the separation of and the segregating out of Christianity and faith out of public life.
Yeah, Debbie makes a great point. Because look at this. This memorial, I think everybody who looks at that memorial, that Bladensburg Memorial, I don't think anybody with a mind looks at that and thinks, oh, this is about Jesus. They see valor, courage, honor. They see that it's dedicated to 49 men who lost their lives. The cross is there to reflect sacrifice, a concept that everybody can really together buy into. But I don't know what the word, this might be a little too strong, but essentially the bloodlust of those who want to get rid of Christ is so great that they can't even allow a symbol that's not even being used for that purpose to exist. They want it banned. It's like the religious cleansing of the United States, religious apartheid or something, really radical. It's so over the top. The last time we had a case similar to this going towards the Supreme Court was Mojave Desert.
I was about to bring that up because didn't we already decide this in the Supreme Court?
Well,
yes.
It was all backwards. So they didn't decide it directly, but we did a poll. We had Barna do a poll, and the poll was 93% of the country said, leave this memorial alone. 93%. And yet we've got two judges that say unconstitutional after 100 years. And so, God forbid that this is the last Memorial Day for the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial. If they do, if the Supreme Court doesn't take it or this is upheld, I don't know what's going to happen. Veterans are probably going to go out there and, they might be defending that. So hopefully the Supreme Court will take this and reverse it and not only solve Bladensburg, but the whole country, all the memorials we have all over the country that have crosses or stars of David or religious symbols will then be protected, and we won't have to worry about these kinds of attacks on Memorial Day.
There just have to be religious symbols at cemeteries and military memorials all over this country. There just have to be. And, I appreciate very much that people can say, well, this is just the symbol that the people chose who created this memorial. Why do we have to all get offended about it? I would love the court to go even further and say, and there's nothing offensive about a religious symbol on public land. If it was something reflecting the Jewish faith, I don't know what they would choose as its equivalent, but whatever it were to be, why wouldn't we agree instead that religious expression is welcome in this country versus to say, well, as long as we can find an excuse and put it into category of, well, it's kind of historical, so we'll ignore the religious significance. I want them to come down and just clobber the idea that religious expression is banned in America.
I'm waiting for the clobber. I haven't seen it yet, but anyway, we dealt with this in the Mojave case. Of course, you guys go to San Diego. The cross there has been
Mount
controversial.
Huge.
And then right here in Bladensburg, and there are many others. As a matter of fact, we got to take a break, but we could go through the long list of all the veterans memorials, and we could go through the long list of everything that Michael Berry at First Liberty has to deal with all the chaplains and all the it's getting out of hand. And if you agree with that, love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back to this a little bit later, but I thought this time last week we had a school shooting in Santa Fe, and I posted a piece by our friend Jerry Newcomb that reminded us they were also doing some religious bigotry back in Santa Fe years ago. We'll be right back.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, Debbie Georgatos, and I wanted to at least focus a little bit more on religious liberty before we move on to so many other articles we have here. And this is a piece that was put together by Jerry Newcomb, and he reminds us that 20 years ago he produced a story for D. James Kennedy, and Jerry's been on the program with us before, and it had to do with school prayer. Well, of course, we all know of the shooting in Santa Fe, Texas, and that was a big issue. And I appreciate that the person sitting in this chair last Friday when I was out was Colonel Allen West. I think he knows something about the Second Amendment since he's on the board of the NRA and all the rest, and I think they did a great job. But this was just a reminder, and Kelly, you and I have been around long enough to remember some of this, that Santa Fe, Texas is a place where first, of course, a lot of people know the case that went all the way to the Supreme Court about the prayer with the football games. You know, The Supreme Court said you have to have a separation of prayer and player. But I'd forgotten the other one, and that is you had a federal judge, Samuel Kent, who said he wouldn't even allow them to have prayers at a baccalaureate. Now, I've spoken at graduations and I've spoken at baccalaureates. Usually at a baccalaureate, you have a lot of freedom because it's oftentimes in a church. Yep. But nevertheless, he says anyone who violates these orders, no kidding, is going to wish he or she had died as a child when the court gets through with it, and actually threatened that anybody who invoked the name of Jesus could be arrested by federal marshals and jailed for a minimum of 6 months. You remember that case?
Oh, yes, I do, for a number of reasons. Number one, the Santa Fe case at the Supreme Court, I was co-counsel, Jay Sekulow and myself, and so I was involved in that. And then the order with regard to baccalaureate services that not only said things to students, but told teachers that they were not allowed to attend a private baccalaureate service on the weekend. We actually had to, it's what's called a writ of prohibition, which is an emergency appeal to the Federal Court of Appeals, very rarely granted because it's such an extreme deal. They ruled in our way. You know, we kind of facetiously said, what's next? Teachers can't sit together in the choir at their church because a student might see them. I mean, the idea that the school can tell a teacher where they can go on the weekends and what religious services they can attend. So
this is not North Korea, is it? I don't think. This was Santa Fe, Texas.
We did get that reversed, but I do think there's some real irony here, and that this school district tried to have prayer at their events, and the Supreme Court said you can't do that. And then 20 years later, you know, there's a mass shooting, and I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, especially those of faith, say that. Not that there's a direct connection in this case, but this is the issue, that if you wouldn't push God out of the schools, you'd have much less of these incidents because people's lives would be different, and they would feel like they're accountable to somebody greater than themselves, and people would be helping one another more. And so I do think it's, you know, as we look for solutions, you know, I think, you know, we all know the real solution, which is people's hearts, and only God can get to that. So it is really ironic that this is a place that was banning prayer. Not the school district. The school district was trying to do some things to allow for prayer and speech, and including students to do their own if they wanted to. And then now they're in the middle of this tragedy.
Yeah, Judge Kent was going to throw people into jail, and turns out he ended up going to jail.
He did.
Yeah,
he did.
Another story.
A little bit of irony
He was
there.
impeached.
Yeah,
essentially.
Yeah, basically. And just before we get to Debbie's comments, because I can see she's chomping at the bit, when we talk about a prayer before a football game, I'm thinking, I was just in Florida, and I was real close to a stadium where you have a case where, in this case, you had two Christian groups, two Christian high schools in a championship. It's all Christian. They're Christians in the stands, and they're told it's a secular microphone or some bizarre thing, government microphone, and they couldn't even have a prayer there when everybody in the room pretty much and everybody in the stadium was a Christian.
Yeah, it was two private Christian schools in the state championship, and the state of Florida, the Florida High School Athletic Association said you can't pray. This stadium, by the way, the real irony of ironies is this is where Billy Graham held one of his first major evangelism, events. And here we are a number of years later now, and they're telling two Christian schools they can't have a prayer. So we're we're now on our way to the federal. Well, we're at the Federal Court of Appeals on that case, and that argument will be in the upcoming months.
Debbie, you just shake your head, right?
You shake your head, and I'm trying to take notes.
Cambridge Christian School.
Okay.
And that one's at First Liberty, and is one of their key cases, by the way.
I remember the facts. I had not thought about it again recently, but I remember you having talked about, or us having talked about that. I do think that I go back to this whole notion. There is just this argument that seems to prevail in modern liberalism, intellectualism, that the highest and most righteous, the most just thing to do, the fairest thing to do, is to drive faith out of public discussion and segment it or sequester it into churches or homes or private families, but that somehow any expression of it is diminishing of our republic, diminishing of our culture in America. When the exact opposite, the point that is being made in this one article about the Santa Fe School by Jerry Newcomb, this is from Town Hall, but that you can't deny when you have drained from culture the kind of common expectation which was there in America for hundreds of years, 100+ years, that we're a Christian nation, that we have the faith in God's a normal thing, and faith in God imbues in people and students a sense of purpose, a sense of morality, a sense of mattering. I'm not just a wandering, carbon unit floating around the earth. I have purpose, I have meaning, and when you drive that out as some kind of morally superior, worldview, that secularism is kind of the highest idea, and these silly little mythologies beneath that are floating around, you really do change culture. And the idea of and I am very aware, I will say, I'm very aware that you need to be honoring and respectful of the idea that children come to public schools with very different religious backgrounds. They come with no religion at all, defiant atheism being taught in their home, or secularism, or any of a wide range of faiths. And we can be cognizant and careful in our schools not to be seeming to impart an insistence on a particular faith in public school. And that's obviously was the initial incentive, or the initial expression of concern by some people who are trying to take prayer out of public school, is we can't be proselytizing students in the public schools, and they can't be made to feel like they're not equal with everybody else if they don't embrace this faith. We went so far to protect that we're just kind of exalting godlessness as the highest virtue. And you can't help but hurt a society when you take away faith as a common denominator assumption about who we are as Americans. And it has to drive students who have no sense of, and people, no sense of a place, a God-given purpose, a place, a mission, an identity. Then you're just kind of I use the expression carbon unit. You're just a wandering, biological mass. And then you are more prone to arguments of being stirred up to anger, resentment, suicide. You're not grounded enough to function well in society. It's a very sad thing. It's going to take the public school. It's going to be pushing from the Supreme Court and from families and churches to insist that religion doesn't just belong on Sunday morning or in your home. It is a common assumption about American society that must be permitted to be expressed in public places.
Glad you're using the word carbon unit, because if you use the word animals, I found out from the president you can't use that phrase right now.
Bad.
Another story.
Yeah.
One of some of our listeners are up in Minnesota, and you had Minnesota State Senator Dan Hall introduced a bill that would allow privately funded posters that had the national motto "In God We Trust" in the classroom. And that was just too controversial, Kelly. And that reminds me of another case that you've been dealing with as well, because we've had Freedom from Religion Foundation say you can't even have "On God We Trust" on bumper stickers of law enforcement
Yeah,
cars.
there was a lot of law enforcement that have it on their police cars, "In God We Trust."
And it is the national motto, right?
It is. They were threatened, and we were like, well, we'll represent all of you for free. Of course, the lawsuit never came, by the way. We were waiting for that lawsuit. That was going to be a lot of fun to have them argue that the national motto is unconstitutional. And it's just as silly in Minnesota to say that to have the national motto in the school. Maybe you want to teach them about the national motto. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that would be part of things, but that's just bizarre. It shows how upside down things are. And what Debbie just mentioned is interesting, because I saw an article just yesterday. I wish I could remember it, but it was trying to analyze why all the suicides in youth, the increase, and the number one factor that had changed that was really noticeable was the pushing out of religion. and that there seemed to be a direct correlation with young people when they had no hope because there's no faith. It is leading to a lot more people taking their lives, which is really sad.
Well, let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so. So, again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you find yourself saying, I want to read the stories that you're quoting from, the first three, right there on the website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can find two of those also at firstliberty.org. We'll be back right after this.
The Me Too movement is curtailing sexual predation in the workplace, but it has a growing destructive component. Institutions across society are doing all they can to make certain the term all-white male could never be used to describe them. Journalist, attorney, and Manhattan Institute fellow Heather McDonald spoke about this to students and faculty at Hillsdale College. She warned, and I'm quoting her, Me Too is going to unleash a new torrent of gender and race quotas throughout the economy, on the theory that all disparities in employment and institutional representation are due to harassment and bias. She says American competitiveness and scientific achievement will suffer. She points out that diversity and inclusion were top themes at the World Economic Forum, chaired exclusively by women this year. CEOs revealed that a key determinant of managers' pay levels is now their record of hiring and promoting females and minorities. There's a war on merit. Criticizing it can get you fired. Just ask James Danmore, famously fired by Google last year for writing a memo suggesting that bias is not to blame for the fact that tech companies aren't employing men and women at 50-50 rates. He cited research showing that men and women are attracted to and prepare for different types of work. Saying this supposedly risked traumatizing female Google employees. But the attention, including billions of dollars, paid to attract women into the hard sciences is not paying off. Ms. McDonald told the crowd at Hillsdale, this is not surprising, given mounting evidence of the differences in interests and aptitudes between the sexes. Females usually seek jobs that are seen as directly helping others by a 2-to-1 ratio over males. But mainstream institutions in our society, Hollywood, business, banking, Silicon Valley, and certainly academia, are turning themselves into pretzels to prefer diversity over aptitude, sacrificing excellence. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition. In studio with us today, Debbie Georgatos and Kelly Shackelford. We've been talking about religious liberty, which is a First Amendment issue. I want to talk about another First Amendment issue, since I got two lawyers sitting across from me. And this one we've mentioned just in passing yesterday, but didn't get into it, and I thought it would be good to get some legal minds here. And that is a judge rules that Donald Trump can't block users on Twitter. Now, to understand that, when I have a Twitter account, it's my account. So it seems to me that if I then become the mayor, city council person, or president of the United States, it's still my account. You know, it just as if I have my own phone and I have a do not call, you can't tell me later on that I can't have a do not call from my own private phone. So that's the way I look at it. But apparently I don't know what I'm talking about, because a federal judge ruled that Donald Trump, President Trump, can't block people from viewing his Twitter feed. In many cases, they were just hassling him and things like that, simply because it's a public forum. Debbie, what about this?
Well, I think he has 3 accounts, and I was, the one that is the most popular by far, that all the tweets that you see on the national news is at real Donald Trump.
Right.
That's the one that people follow, and
I would consider that a personal account. It was before he was president, right?
Yeah.
You know
okay.
what?
Yeah. And maybe I'm missing something
I'm
here.
going to get outvoted here, I can tell. But, I have to say, on this subject, maybe I'm not, I don't know. But on this subject, her point, this justice who is a judge appointed by President Clinton, so it's a liberal Democrat judge. But the way Twitter works, I think, is part of it. And then whether it's his account, I guess, is the other one. But, when you, the First Amendment idea is that you have freedom of speech, and that you, but you don't have to be forced to listen to somebody's speech. I can say, I don't want to hear what this guy says or this person, so I don't have to listen. In Twitter world, Donald Trump, is putting out tweets, and people can comment on them. And people do. And they mock, and they say, oh, you're crazy, whatever they say. They criticize his tweets and his policies. So I guess and Kelly litigates on the First Amendment things way more than I do, but I've never litigated a First Amendment issue, to be precise. But I think the idea of when you're president of the United States and you have a Twitter account and you're putting out public policy, it is I don't know, maybe you have a Supreme Court or other precedent that would say what I'm saying is wrong, but it's a public forum. I mean, you're putting out your policy, you're blasting this person, you're criticizing that, you're saying what's wrong with North Korea, you're saying what's wrong with Senator so-and-so, Congressman so-and-so. It's kind of like a newspaper. I mean, it's not, it's interesting because the courts are having to begin to deal with First Amendment principles that arose out of written speech and spoken speech and apply to social media, which is a whole other world. And there'll probably be many, many cases, and there probably already are. But in this case, this is a president commentating away and communicating with the public, which I'm one of the few Americans, about 99% of President Trump's tweets I love. I'm glad he does it because he is going right over the heads of the media who always distort what he says and putting it out there. And because that's for his purpose, I'm just not so so what he did, basically, people who really harassed him, he tried to block them from being able to comment on his tweets. And the court saying, no, if you're out there, this is a public thing, and, you don't have to respond to them, you don't have to like them, but you can't block them from responding to you. So I was kind of okay with the court, but I could be wrong. Kelly's about to tell me.
The public forum doctrine was really kind of created for government property.
Right.
In other words...
Yeah, if you have your own BlackBerry that's a government issue or something like that.
Well,
right?
Or even more... Traditionally, it was, let's say, a park or a street or even an internal building at a public university. Those are all... you start out with, the first thing is it government property? And then you ask, has it been opened up for a discussion?
Right.
So for instance, let's say a university decides, or a city or anybody decides to create this certain area for, an event, or, where speakers come or whatever.
Yeah, free speech platform. I've done those before.
So that's what you usually ask in public forum. Has a forum been created, a government forum, where then private people can come in and give free speech? If they have, then there are restrictions on what the government... Now, it's government property, let's say the Department of Defense, where their offices are, is government property. Does that mean you have a right to walk into their offices and engage in free speech? No, because that's government property, but it hasn't been opened up for a public discussion. In this case, they're trying to deal with something that's not like physical property. It's Twitter, right? So they're really trying to figure out how to do that now. But I didn't like this decision because there is a at POTUS,
right.
There is a Twitter account that the presidents use.
Yeah.
And
or the White House website or anything like that. Yes.
That's right. This was Donald Trump's Twitter account before he was ever president. And so, I feel like he ought to have a right to express whatever he wants and include whoever he wants on his Twitter account, because I don't think that's the government. I think that's him as a private citizen having a right to express what he wants. If he was using government money, something like that, then you got a different story. But I don't, and I think there's a danger in this. A lot of the people pushing on this are sort of the real left-wing groups that are supposedly for free speech. I think they're short-sighted, because I think when you began to create, when you began to make a private speaker a government speaker, you take away their freedoms. They're thinking about the Twitter responders, right? But the point is, what they have to do to make that work is they have to make Donald Trump's private Twitter account into a government entity. And now he doesn't really have any rights to free speech if it's a government entity. It's just the government can say what it wants. And this is what they try to do, for instance, with valedictorian speakers. They'll say, well, you're speaking at our valedictorian address, so you're a government speaker. No, they're not.
Yeah.
They're speaking their own beliefs. But if you allow the government to say you're a government speaker, you just lost all your First Amendment rights. And so I don't like the idea of sort of creating more government, speech in this kind of a situation. I feel like his POTUS account should be his government account, his private account's his private account, and should be able to do what he wants. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. This is a very liberal circuit. It's New York. It'll go up to the Second Circuit. Probably he's not going to find a lot of friends there. I don't know. We'll see what and whether it goes to the Supreme Court's an iffy issue as well. We'll see.
I'm just glad you made the connection, because I saw a connection between Samuel Blackledge, who is the valedictorian, and Donald Trump. Now, those two individuals are about as different as night and day, but the principle seems to run through that. Anyway, Debbie, your thoughts?
Well, actually, now I want to read the whole decision. I just read an article, and I've actually read one article, the one that's posted at pointofview.net, and I want to read more because I think you're making very thoughtful points. I think, the idea of a government official having to surrender everything private isn't the right thing. I mean, he is a government official, obviously, but, if he's permitted to have a private Twitter following, well, it's just so... I mean, the reality is no one or very few follow. I'm going to guess he has many more followers at Real Donald Trump.
Yeah, sure.
It's practically a public square conversation there. It's a hard thing, but I like I dislike restrictions on speech. I want to support the notion. Basically, everyone has a right to speak and therefore, I guess you're saying the right to speak extends to his right in this account to block who he wants to block.
Yeah, I would think so. And then they have a right to form their own accounts and attack him.
Right.
But why do they have a right to be in his account?
In his face is what they're trying to get in his face. Yeah. So they could have
Facebook,
at
Twitter,
I hate Donald
that.
Trump, and they could tweet all day long and mock everything he tweets. They can still see his tweets, by the way, on Twitter. You don't even have to have a Twitter account. You can see tweets. You can go to twitter.com, read tweets all day long, but to post you have to have a comment. So people, I'm going to think about that.
Yeah.
Next time
I saw that 9 years ago, interesting enough, because they talked about the fact that, and this goes back 9 years, that incoming President Barack Obama wanted to have his own BlackBerry. And was that the government BlackBerry or his? And so, of course, he had to do all sorts of things to prevent anybody from being able to hack it, but he should have the freedom to communicate with whom he wanted to. This is one step further because it's, of course, now Twitter and Facebook and all that.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so. Let's take a break. All of it available on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We are certainly encouraging you to consider how you are going to celebrate this Memorial Day weekend, and we are going to spend some time a little bit later talking about that. It's also a time of graduation, so we're going to talk about maybe an update on the story of this valedictorian that was not allowed to speak, and so we'll have lots of things to cover in just a few minutes. But first of all, it is our weekend edition, and Penna Dexter is out, but we have Debbie Georgatos sitting in there, and of course Kelly Shackelford. And so we have some opportunity to look at a couple of issues. But Debbie, let me come to you for just a minute. One of the topics we only occasionally touch on, in part because almost every other talk show talks about it all the time, is what Donald Trump has now called Spygate, or whether you want to talk about that or the Robert Mueller investigation. And one of the articles I've posted is by Cheryl Atkinson, who, of course, used to work with the mainstream media, but has 8 signs pointing to a counterintelligence operation deployed against Donald Trump's camp. And I thought it was helpful just to have not only the summary, but then if you actually follow this, there's the links to all the other articles about what CNN has reported, what NBC has reported, what the New York Times has reported, what the FBI has acknowledged. And it was just a really good summary of what I think is an investigation that theoretically was started to determine whether or not there was collusion between the Trump camp and Russia. And in the process, we've learned about a variety of other things that I don't think anybody on the other side would have ever expected would have come out, because the assumption from the beginning, I think, from some of the people in the intelligence community was Hillary Clinton would be the president right now.
Absolutely. That was the assumption. And actually, right up until Election Day, that was the assumption of pretty much everyone in America. You know, I know, and you're right, Kerby, that this story is covered so extensively by many media sources. And it, I guess, depends a lot on which side of the aisle you're on, how you see this story. But before I dive into the specifics, I want to say I do encourage people to read the article you referred them to, go to some of the links, because this is not just Republican versus Democrat or Trump versus Hillary or Trump versus Obama. This is the idea of whether what appears to have occurred is that at the highest levels of the national security agencies of this country, our intelligence gathering and national security agencies, there was an effort beginning under the final year of the President Obama's presidency to use our national security agencies in an effort to undermine a political opponent. That appears the investigation into this Russia-Trump collusion, that allegation of collusion came later, the planting of people in the Trump campaign to find something, some way to undermine, embarrass, prosecute, destroy him. It seems to have been the beginning of this episode. And the reason it's so problematic, this is KGB level style conduct. If you decide that as you're the holding power, you're the one in Washington holding power, you run the agencies, you run the White House, you run the FBI, you run the CIA, you run the DIA, you run all of those entities, and to use those to go after a political enemy is a grotesque undermining of the rule of law in America and the use of our national security forces. This is why so many people are wound up about it. And it has so many tangled webs and so many players and so many people involved that it can seem complex. You can think, and the temptation to say, well, I don't know what really happened. You know, something happened there with, somehow we think probably with Trump and the Russians. But what this article does, and it is very good because it's laying out things in specific ways. But for one thing, it turns out that this is not this expression, Operation Crossfire Hurricane. Just to start with, she's making the point that within the highest levels of the FBI and the Department of Justice, they gave a name to this operation, what they were doing, which was stirring things up against President Trump. But beyond that, there was excessive use of wiretapping, in fact, and so she runs through the wiretapping problems, and the apparent use of wiretapping. Use wiretapping when you already have a crime alleged and you're trying to get evidence, not to dig in and see what you can find. And then a related point is the appointment of Robert Mueller as special prosecutor. He was not appointed under a federal statute. He was appointed under Department of Justice regulations, which require an actual allegation of a crime before you can appoint a special prosecutor. There was no underlying crime ever alleged. It was a fishing expedition type of appointment of Robert Mueller. But as this article goes on to point out, various efforts by people paid for by the government to unmask, which is essentially when the government is spying on someone, a foreign, under the FISA warrants, they can spy on a foreign intelligence person, and they will inevitably, as they are spying on, listening in, they will pick up statements by other people who are not the direct target of that spying. And so they're supposed to keep, it is incidental picking up of their statements, their recorded, their voices. But those voices, those people who were just interacting with a foreign intelligent person are not supposed to be exposed. And so they have a masking. They have a system that assumes your name will not be out there. But what went on under the Obama administration was serial and massive unmasking, essentially with the goal of exposing, and this is all occurring during the 2016 election cycle, to make those people appear to be criminal and suspect, names floated around, and excessive, endless leaking, all with the idea to make the Trump campaign appear to be complicit in some extreme wrongdoing. So this article about changing the rules, the media strategy, the leaks, just everything they did. And the big news that came out this last week, which I think your listeners, our listeners should probably be tuned into, is a gentleman named Stephen, Stefan Halper, Halper. Stephen Halper being the one, a one-time CIA operative, having been the one very early on planted into and stirring up things in the Trump campaign, trying to tease lower-level Trump people into agreeing with what suggestions he was planting. Don't you think that Trump people probably have connections to the Russia hacking? I mean, and I know it took a long time in this segment, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be dominated, but it's so important to understand this story, because if we don't get to the bottom of this and understand who did what and prosecute wrongdoers, you will have rogue federal agencies no longer following the rule of law in America.
Kelly, I'll probably get your comments after the break, but it reminds me of when you, a while back, were talking about some of the politicization that was taking place at the IRS and then at the FBI and other places. We're not blaming everyone, but people in senior positions of leadership, right?
Yeah, and this goes back to me to one of the things I thought was disturbing under the past administration was somewhat of the politicization of the Justice Department. I had never seen that before. Whether it was Clinton or Bush or whoever, they defended the laws. And then you saw under Obama, Holder and others refusing to defend, like the Defense of Marriage Act and certain other things. And I express real concern when you start to pull back. Now it's not the rule of law. Now it's the rule of I'm in charge and I'll defend which laws I want. I don't like that law, so I won't defend that. And so that was disturbing, and this is sort of where it ends up. I mean, we'll have to see what the facts are, but if these facts are true about this, I mean, this is really the loss of rule of law. Now you've got FBI and intelligence being used as political weapons, which we can never allow to happen in this country.
Well, again, we've posted that article for you to read. Also going to spend some time talking about the valedictorian speech as well as veterans on Memorial Day. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one of the many dividing lines between progressives and conservatives is their belief in the efficiency and effectiveness of government bureaucracies. Liberals may have some misgivings about how they are treated at the Department of Motor Vehicles or by the TSA at airports. Nevertheless, they tend to believe that government is the solution to most social and political problems. Conservatives are usually more skeptical about government and support the private sector over the public sector, but their reactions seem tempered by the fact that they generally have high respect for people in the military and law enforcement. It's this difference in perspective concerning federal bureaucracies that shows up in many debates, including the current one about vetting refugees and other immigrants. In a recent column, Kevin Williamson asked, who seriously thinks that our public institutions are up to the job of properly investigating tens of thousands of refugees, asylum seekers, and ordinary immigrants every year? If Donald Trump's temporary order seems to you unreasonable, ask yourself what the next best option is and how much confidence we should have in it. When I read or hear someone assure us that the government screening of refugees and immigrants is very effective, I want to ask them some questions. Have you been to the DMV or the VA recently? Have you visited an immigration office recently? Sometimes you find a well-run organization, but far too often you probably walked out of a government building shaking your head because it was hardly run efficiently and effectively. Add to this the reality that the information from some of these countries for these refugees and immigrants is sketchy at best. That is why I think some are more trusting of the federal bureaucracy than is warranted. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to get into some of the religious liberty issues, but I thought for just a minute we might spend a few minutes on this subject of this issue of, you hear so many names, you hear about Fusion GPS, and you hear about the various individuals, Michael Cohen, and then, of course, we're talking about James Clapper and Samantha Powers and Sally Yates, and you can just go down the long, long list of individuals, John Brennan, of course, James Comey, and Robert Mueller, and on and on. After a while, it gets complicated, Kelly, but it brings us back to one of the first principles, and that is, you and I have been around long enough to remember when we assumed that the Justice Department, most of the time, there have been some exceptions, most of the time was just playing it down the middle. It was like an umpire. It really didn't matter whether you had a Republican president or a Democratic president. They were actually enforcing the rule of law. And you and I have talked about this before, that when all of a sudden one day Eric Holder said, I'm no longer going to enforce, and you mentioned the Defense of Marriage Act, that's a good example. And then you had the president, Barack Obama, saying, I'm going to actually write some executive orders that have nothing to do with the way executive orders are normally done. Even though I supposedly don't have an authority to do something like DACA, I'm going to do it anyway. That sort of changed the whole picture in ways that we've never seen before. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think under Democrat, Republican, you always had political appointees at the very top.
Of course.
But you had the career lawyers in the Department of Justice who, they were going to do their job. And that meant that, it doesn't, you come in as the president and past laws were passed under different presidents. So you might not like those laws. But it doesn't really matter. The Justice Department, their job would be to defend those laws if they came under attack. and do the best job they could to defend those. And all of a sudden they were saying, we don't like that law. We're not going to defend that law. And I expressed how dangerous that was. That's really dangerous, because now you're moving away from the rule of law. Well, again, what we're hearing in the intelligence arena is like the ultimate losing the rule of law. I mean, we've turned into a banana republic a little bit if now we have these weapons and assets that are a part of the United States government to help us against foreign enemies and others, to spy on them, to national security, to protect ourselves. Mm-hmm. To take those weapons, those assets, and to use the government to turn them on your political opponent, I mean, that's really, really, really dangerous. It makes Watergate look like a little bit of a joke. And so, again, depending upon what the true facts really are that are coming out, we can see a bunch of them. It's very disturbing, a lot of the things we've seen, even the tweets back and forth with some of the FBI and what they were saying. And again, this is the very top. It's not the down the line FBI agent. I'm sure all across the country are not involved in any of this kind of stuff. They're doing their job. But this is really disturbing. It has to be looked at. One of the things that bothers me is that it's almost like this should not be partisan, and yet it seems hard to find Democrats that are wanting to look at this. And you're like, oh my gosh, you have to look at this. This will be you next. Are you that short-sighted? If it's okay, then I guess okay. Now Donald Trump can use the FBI and the Justice Department to go after his political opponents. Is that what you? We can't. Your country's gone at that point. So this is something that if it really occurred, there needs to be serious consequences to everybody who was involved in this, because this is an attack at the very soul of our country.
I was just thinking, Debbie, that if you watch the different news channels, you get two different commentaries on this right now. We talk about the loss of the rule of law, and you go to like a Fox News, and they're saying, well, look at the loss of rule of law in terms of what we just talked about. You go to MSNBC, and they're saying, well, it's the loss of rule of law because Donald Trump is criticizing the Mueller investigation and wants to investigate the Mueller investigation. So it's almost like we're living on two different planets, depending on which news channel you go to and which group of individuals, depending on their political affiliation, are actually watching some of the things unfolding.
That's absolutely true. I was using the expression during the break about it's like parallel universes. One left-wing news outlet is reporting something that just seems like they're essentially confirming that the Mueller investigation was correct to engage in, and that there was obvious evidence of Russia-Trump collusion, and that we're still waiting to find it after 2 years. They haven't found any, but they're still looking. And then on the conservative side, you see the kind of allegations we're talking about here. But I want to plant this one seed to understand when I'm talking about how insidious I think this is. The allegation now that many pieces of this are already known, they're not speculation. They've come from the FBI, begrudgingly turning over to the House Intelligence Committee. But Stephen Halper is the name that is the current most important name to understand, I guess. He went over to England and met with very low-level Trump-affiliated people and had conversations. What appeared to have happened is he was planting the seed to these people who had no idea what he was talking about. Well, isn't it true that there's been some talk about maybe Russia was the one that hacked in and got all these emails released, and maybe there's Russia-Trump collusion, and do you know whether they're Russian emails, and do you know whether the Trump knows about them? So asking questions, and both of the low-level people he talked to, George Papadopoulos and Carter Page, both said, I don't know what you're talking about. And that was their basic answer. But because the conversation happened, then later when they are again talking to somebody else and they say, well, have you heard about this? Well, yeah, they heard about it because Halper planted the seed with them. And they go, well, yeah, I guess I have heard about that. And there's a great piece. It's very lengthy by Mark Stein, but laying out the same. When you put all those pieces together, it looks very much like this was a setup from the start to then justify the FBI getting the Russian dossier, which followed after this whole Halper stuff. The Russian dossier thing came up, and then they got their warrants, and off they were to the races, trying to bring about a potential criminal prosecution. And it's just I couldn't agree more with what Kelly said. This should not be Republican versus Democrat, or it should be just America or not America. I mean, you have a rule of law and a national security agencies and the national law enforcement agencies whose job it is to follow the law, to enforce the law equally. If you don't have that, you just have more like a tin pot dictatorship. You have something less than it is noble and right for America to have.
Yeah, this is important, and I do feel like a lot of things are coming out, which is good. I think that it's, the way the FBI and our, Justice Department works, there's a lot of secrecy, especially in the FBI. But you know what? There has to be accountability. People don't work well without accountability. And what's going on now, I think, is some accountability that is desperately needed, evidently. And but I just, again, I don't know for sure until all the facts come out. But what I'm seeing makes me think that, people like Comey and Clapper and some of these people, if what it looks like is happened, I mean, I think it's close to treason what they did. Is a really misuse of their position for political purposes and to lie and to try to deceive the press. And I think of Comey going in there and intentionally getting information and then leaking the information. So here's the head of the FBI leaking, which is, classified information. Now he tries to say it's not classified. His conversations with the president aren't, classified or secret. It's ridiculous. But to go in and talk to the president, to have some agenda, to get information, to go and leak that information because you want, and this is what he's admitted, because you want an investigation open. All of that is just something that we've never really seen before. And I think it's a level of what it's got to, to me, it's close to treason that I can imagine. It's certainly not what our public officials are supposed to be doing.
There was a commentary by Kimberly Strassel in Wall Street Journal, I think today, or she was just saying, and others have made the point, but really the President of the United States is the ultimate head of the Department of Justice and the FBI. These are entities within the executive branch. At some point, it's incumbent on him to order the release of all the documents that the Department of Justice and FBI are holding back and refusing to give to Congress, and granting very limited access. Two people can come look at it, but you can't take notes and you can't take pictures. There is a point at which he will have to decide just to order the release of everything except the most top national security secret things that must be protected to get to the bottom of this. And I'm sure that's something that he's contemplating, but very, very hard decision to make, because you're going to have a lot of blowback from the press if you try that.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, want to give you a little bit of an update. We've mentioned this situation with this valedictorian that was not allowed to speak, and Kelly Shackelford here with us for a little bit longer. Also, since it's Memorial Day weekend, I want to talk about the Bladensburg Cross, and those are two articles we posted on the website. We'll be right back.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story, or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, we want to focus a little bit of time and attention on religious liberty, as we do so often here on Point of View, and for some very important reasons. It is weekend edition, and we have Debbie Georgatos and Kelly Shackelford. And Kelly, let me come to you. First of all, we have an article by Todd Starnes about Sam Blackledge. Worked hard on his valedictorian address, and then just before he was to give it, found out because he mentioned Jesus, no mas. Can't allow him to do that. And over these years, it seems like always during May or June, we have many cases sometimes of kids who at a valedictorian speech cannot mention Jesus, the Bible, or God, or sometimes can't even mention it in a baccalaureate speech. This one is from the state of Illinois, isn't it?
It is. And we do seem to have one of these every year. We win them every year, but we have to have them every year. And so I would just say this, number one, anybody listening all over the country, because Point of View's all over the country, if you have a valedictorian situation or salutatorian, or maybe you just have been given the right to make the opening statement or whatever, and you have any problem, call us at First Liberty. We're happy to help, and it's much better to get this thing nailed down beforehand rather than have something happen to you like with Sam, which means it was ruined, really, because they didn't want him to mention Christ, and he can never get that back. But you can if you have a little time. So if you know somebody, if there's any problems, it could be as simple as you just calling, or maybe the parent calling and just getting from us what your rights are. So then when you can go and talk to the school district and make sure that they don't do something. But we're happy to help. In Sam's case, since it's already happened, the most important thing we're trying to accomplish now is to get a policy in place so this doesn't happen again. So we've sent a demand letter to the school district, and we'll see. If they don't, there's ways to play this, right? You can either do the right thing, or you can fight and get beaten because the First Amendment is against you. You have a right as the valedictorian. It's a personal farewell. It's your free speech. People give all kinds of political statements, as we all know, in the valedictorian, right? Whether it's about, I remember back in the old days, maybe it's about apartheid, or maybe it's about, you name the issue. And I'm sure all over the country, people are mentioning personal, beliefs about certain things. The idea that the government can come in and say, well, we don't like those beliefs, or, oh, no, you can't mention your faith, or you can't mention Christ. They've opened this person has earned the right. They got a 4.0 or whatever. That's why they got the valedictorian. And the idea that the government then is going to censor the speech because it's going to be religious, it violates free speech. It violates free exercise of religion. It's religious viewpoint discrimination, and it's against the First Amendment. So just realize that is a right there. And gosh, that's what we should be teaching these kids. These kids are being trained to be young citizens, the future leaders of our country. What a horrible thing that the last thing they would learn is, oh, by the way, you're allowed to say in public what the government will allow you to say. No, that's not this country. What they need to be taught is you do have a right to express your beliefs. So if you hear of anybody that needs help, let them know. And I would encourage you to follow this case and really be praying for Sam and for this school district and for all the other kids who are going to walk in his footsteps.
The other thought I had, because we talked about this a little bit earlier, but, the reason schools respond to this pressure by this, there wasn't an organization involved, I guess, in this case, but the various organizations that advocate against free speech based on religion, whether it's Freedom from Religion, all those other kind of groups, school districts and, frankly, corporate boards respond because they get threatening contacts from these kind of organizations. And it's easier, the kind of standard operating procedure assumption is it's easier to shut this speech down because we might get criticized. And we need to flip that expectation, that assumption about society that it's easier just to silence Christian speech or speech based on your faith, because otherwise you might get one of these kind of belligerent anti-religious organizations coming after you we need people to be afraid that you don't want them afraid, but you want them just to feel very inspired and emboldened by the First Amendment in this country. That's the standard against which they should make their decisions. And it does take people speaking up. You're talking about people talking to your schools, your friends, other parents. I mean, push that as the norm in American society. Of course we have that right.
Yeah, and again, Kelly, I've seen you before. When somebody says, well, I might get sued by the ACLU, you say, well, if you don't do this, I'll sue you, and I always win.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at this case, right? I mean, this is just a clear violation of the First Amendment. And so if somebody thought, the ACLU would get us in trouble if we let the student in their own speech mention Christ, well, that would be a real mistake to listen if that's what they were advising you, because they just violated the First Amendment. And again, this is what they should be. They're teaching kids the wrong thing, right, too. I mean, this is the ultimate of what we're trying to teach these young people, is how to be mature, articulate, future citizens, the future people running our country. And God forbid, I don't want them ever to get out of school thinking, oh, yeah, and one of the main things I learned is that I can say what the government will allow me to say.
Yeah.
It's like, well, are you living in the Soviet Union? No, you're living in the United States. You get a right to express your opinion, including to mention what Christ meant to your life. And if the government tries to censor you because you say that, what you do as an American citizen is you look at the government and you say, you think you have a power you don't have.
Yeah.
And you can either follow the law now, or I can make you follow in a way that's more painful in front of a federal judge.
I'm sitting across from two lawyers, and so a lot of people say, well, lawyers would understand this. But as I understand, if you go to the Department of Education, they have guidelines that have been there since, 2003, if I remember right?
Way back, yeah.
And so,
under President Clinton.
Yeah, and so those guidelines were there.
Yep.
And so it's really not possible for an administrator, whether it's a superintendent or a principal or a teacher or just a well-meaning parent, to say, well, you can't do that, because all you'd have to do is say, well, here it is, right here in the Department of Education guidelines.
And that's why I say it's so easy. If somebody called it, like they say, my principal told me I'm not going to be able to give my speech because I'm going to mention Christ. It's so easy for us to then say, look, here are the Department of Education guidelines under Bill Clinton that are still in place. Take those to the school. They'll probably look at it and go, oops, and you solve your situation. It's not that you have to go sock them in the teeth or whatever. We're just saying, if you have a problem, call us. We'll give you the information. Certainly, if we have to file a lawsuit, that's always the last resort, and we've had to do that. But we've never lost any of these valedictorian cases. They've always been won because the First Amendment is on the side of the student.
I just love that. When you step back and think about it, most school administrators, there are plenty of people of faith who teach in public schools, who are administrators and principals. They're not necessarily kind of intuitively, we shouldn't assume they'll just be against the expression of faith. They just think the safer thing. They're scared. And so I love the idea. And I didn't even know, another note I took today, I didn't even know that there were Department of Education guidelines back in 2003 making that clear. It's amazing we even have to be talking about it in a way.
We shouldn't, but every year it just shows the atmosphere in the country, this sort of fear of religious expression, and to think that the proper response is to censor it, when that's what's going to get you in trouble. Do students have a right to express their faith? Yes, they do. Well, what if other people will hear it? Oh my gosh, free speech in action, how dare that valedictorian mention his faith? Well, maybe your son should have been the valedictorian, but he didn't earn it. This person did. If your son was there, he could express his opinion in what he's saying to the classmates. So that's how it works. And so Sam, I just feel horrible for what happened to him and his graduation, that he was censored, but we've got to make sure this doesn't happen again, and we've got to be vigilant. And so if you can stop this beforehand, stop it beforehand. Let us know if we can help. But if you're not, go to firstliberty.org and follow Sam's case and see what happens. We'll keep you updated on what's going on with the case.
Again, we've got those links on our website. Matter of fact, I think we even have Sam's speech that he wasn't able to give, in case some of you want to go and give that. And just as we're going to a break, I'm going to direct you to either First Liberty or even right now our Facebook page. Of course, you can watch on our Facebook page. Well, we've posted one of these memes, and you can go to First Liberty Twitter account, and I would encourage you to follow them. But they've done a number, and we've posted, I think, what is Kelly's favorite, which says, "The dead cannot speak for themselves. And this all has to do with this Bladensburg's Cross. Now, that's in Maryland. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about that, and we really want to salute those of you that have served in the military, the veterans. But, of course, this Memorial Day weekend is a time which we also want to honor those who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. And there are individuals who actually did that in World War I. That's why that memorial was established in the first place. But when we come back from the break, Kelly's going to explain to us why some people think this might be the last time you have this memorial at the Bladensburg Cross, what that might mean. And this is an opportunity for us, again, to salute those of you that have served in the military. And as you well know, of course, at First Liberty, they have a whole division just to serve and to defend those of you in the military, including the chaplains that seem to be having a target on their back right now. So we'll come back and find out a little bit more about the Bladensburg Cross right after these important messages.
The Me Too movement is curtailing sexual predation in the workplace, but it has a growing destructive component. Institutions across society are doing all they can to make certain the term all-white male could never be used to describe them. Journalist, attorney, and Manhattan Institute fellow Heather McDonald spoke about this to students and faculty at Hillsdale College. She warned, and I'm quoting her, "Me Too is going to unleash a new torrent of gender and race quotas throughout the economy, on the theory that all disparities in employment and institutional representation are due to harassment and bias." She says American competitiveness and scientific achievement will suffer. She points out that diversity and inclusion were top themes at the World Economic Forum, chaired exclusively by women this year. CEOs revealed that a key determinant of managers' pay levels is now their record of hiring and promoting females and minorities. There's a war on merit. Criticizing it can get you fired. Just ask James Danmore, famously fired by Google last year for writing a memo suggesting that bias is not to blame for the fact that tech companies aren't employing men and women at 50-50 rates. He cited research showing that men and women are attracted to and prepare for different types of work. Saying this supposedly risked traumatizing female Google employees. But the attention, including billions of dollars, paid to attract women into the hard sciences is not paying off. Ms. McDonald told the crowd at Hillsdale, "This is not surprising, given mounting evidence of the differences in interests and aptitudes between the sexes. Females usually seek jobs that are seen as directly helping others by a 2-to-1 ratio over males. But mainstream institutions in our society, Hollywood, business, banking, Silicon Valley, and certainly academia, are turning themselves into pretzels to prefer diversity over aptitude, sacrificing excellence." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and Kelly Shackelford with us for a few more minutes. And so, Kelly, I wanted to spend some time talking about the Bladensburg Cross.
Yes.
Because this might be the last time there would be a memorial celebration there. I know you have Stuart Shepard, who used to do the stoplight commentaries, the video commentaries, so well done, and now he works with you. They're going up there shooting a video, which we'll make available as soon as it's available. But explain this, because this was put up by mothers who lost their sons in the Great War, World War I, and it was something that they maintained for many years. American Legion took it over, but then when they expanded the road, eminent domain took it over, so now technically the cross is on public land, government land. people drive by it every day, but sooner or later somebody is offended that we have a cross on public land. Where are we now?
Yeah, this is a memorial that's been up for 100 years, put up by the money from mothers who lost their sons in World War I. The American Legion owns the monument, and all of a sudden, after 100 years, a federal court of appeals. This is a lawsuit brought by the American Humanist Association saying we can't have a veterans memorial that's a cross. Of course, as we all know, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of those. So that's the implications of this. And we had 2 Obama appointees and 1 Clinton appointee on this panel, the 3-judge panel at the Federal Court of Appeals. During the oral argument, one of the Obama appointees asked, well, if we just cut the arms off the cross, doesn't that take care of the problem? And so we knew at that point there was going to be some problems. And it was a 2-1 decision. The 2 Obama appointed judges said, after 100 years now, this memorial is unconstitutional. We had the Clinton appointee write a dissent saying, of course, it's not unconstitutional. And so literally it's bad enough what this would mean. I mean, they would literally be going in there and bulldozing a monument that's been up for 100 years that was put up by Gold Star Moms and the American Legion and is right outside of D.C. It's in Bladensburg. But the other thing that's really even more, it even adds to the weight, is this Court of Appeals within its district is Arlington National Cemetery. So if this ruling stands, and this ruling says that large freestanding crosses are unconstitutional, they will also have to send the bulldozers into Arlington. And the large freestanding crosses there, the Cross of Sacrifice, the Argonne Cross, etc., would all now, can you imagine going into Arlington and tearing down crosses?
No, I can't.
I can't imagine it at Bladensburg, but much less at Arlington. So we are filing in the Supreme Court in the next couple of months, and we're just surely hoping that the Supreme Court's going to take this, because I can't even imagine if they don't take it. Number one, I see veterans chaining themselves to Bladensburg.
Yes.
I can see them with weapons out there because the idea of tearing down a 100-year-old Veterans Memorial is just outrageous. And so I will say this. A lot of times people, they look for things to do. Everybody's at home and they'll do some, maybe at their lake house or they're somewhere else, but they're on their computer a little more, and they try to look for things to send around to their friends about Memorial Day, maybe on their Facebook page or on their whatever. We've got some great stuff. As Kerby mentioned, it's a Point of View. You can find it. If you go to firstliberty.org, at the top we have a little Twitter symbol, a little Facebook symbol. But the Twitter memes that have been produced are just excellent.
Yes.
They're really powerful. And they not only get into Memorial Day, but they also show you the Bladensburg story. And I would encourage people to use those. I really do think you'll start an amazing discussion. And this weekend, a video is going to be coming out as well on this that is really powerful. And so again, if you're following our Twitter or our Facebook or whatever, you'll see this. But if you're not, you won't. So I was just encouraging people, when they get a chance, go to you spell it out, firstliberty.org, and go on the top to the Twitter or the Facebook and make sure you're connected to what's going on. But I love these are the best memes I've seen in a long time, and I think they're really powerful, the images and the messages that are in there.
And on Twitter, First Liberty's name has the number 1, the digit 1, ST, so First Liberty, at First Liberty, and they are really great. They're really powerful memes. I love the idea of sharing them. I just had the thought when you were talking, Kelly, what is when you think about the organization that filed this lawsuit against this Bladensburg Cross, the American Humanist Association, when will they ever, is their mission really because they would love to have no symbols of religion in any place in America that on public land? Because it's a bizarre thought. Obviously the Arlington National Cemetery is a huge one, and just think, what is the mindset of someone who just says, I'm so enraged by religious symbols that I want to spend money, my time. I could be doing all sorts of good things, feeding the homeless, good things, or I can spend my time and my treasure trying to drive religion. I mean, there's a profound antagonism to God in that thinking. It's not just a pure, high-minded, let's keep America safe for all religions thought. It is a very, vicious maybe isn't the right word, but just sinister disdain for religion that is very dark and very and shouldn't be rewarded. I mean,
just think about. If your goal is sort of a religious cleansing of the landscape, just remove religion from everywhere across the country. What a great blow if you tear down a veterans memorial that's been up for 100 years. Think of all the religious symbols in our veterans cemeteries and monuments all over the country. I don't care where somebody's listening. Probably within 20 miles, there's a veterans memorial or a cemetery with religious symbols. And all those now would have to be sandblasted, would have to be bulldozed, would have to be removed. Boy, you've really made some progress towards your goal of wiping religion from the landscape in the United States of America. And so that's what this is about. And it's why I think everybody should know about this case in America. I don't know how many years ago, Kerby, it was when we had the Mojave Desert Memorial, the cross, go to the Supreme Court, and ended up being dealt with in a sort of an indirect way. So we don't have a precedent on this. That's why we're still having to fight this. But there was a poll that was done by Barna, and 93% of the country said leave the memorial alone. So this is something you don't have to be that fearful about angering everybody, if you post or you talk. But people need to know, because I think if the country spoke with one voice, I think this could be, taken care of by the Supreme Court, hopefully forever for our veterans, because this is it has to be perplexing to them to watch what's happening, and the dishonoring of those who've given their lives. I just can't think of anything worse.
I might just mention that we, in the second hour here, really want to get your phone calls. I'd love to hear from some of you veterans, but I was making a short list here of all the cases involving military people. Philip Monk, Wes Motter, Scott Squires is one that's just a current one, Oscar Rodriguez, Monica Sterling, Leland Bohannon, Joe Lawhorn, just to mention a few off the top of my head. And I thought, we really do have an attack on the military, and that's why I think people should support First Liberty.
Well, it's important. We love having Mike Berry on staff, who's a very experienced military lawyer, and so we bring not only the Constitution but that military law language together, and that's why we're winning all these cases. But this Bladensburg is the one that's in the most danger, and it's right there about to go to the Supreme Court. And on Memorial Day, I think it's the exact time to be talking about this. Is this the last Memorial Day for this memorial that's been up 100 years? What a thought.
This is a time when we would love to hear from you, so let's open up the phones, give you a chance to join the conversation. Kelly will have to run on. Debbie and I will carry on this last hour, and love to hear from some of you that are veterans or would like to honor our veterans. 1-800-351-1212.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos with us. And before we wind down this hour, we will also talk about her upcoming program. She's a host of America Can We Talk. We'll find out a little bit about what she'll be covering this Sunday on that program. And if your local radio station doesn't carry her, you can still listen to her on Facebook Live, and there are other ways to do so as well. We have almost a full bank of phone calls, so we've been postponing those till now. Kelly Shackelford had to head on, and so Debbie Georgatos and I are here. Let's go to Georgia first, WLPE. And Dwayne, what would you like to share with our audience today?
Hi, Kerby. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Okay. I disagree a little bit with Kelly in the fact that I think that we should sue them so much that it hurts, that they are re-educated. And I don't mean that to be real vindictive, but what I'm saying is he's right. Every year it's the same thing. We need to change this. We need to sue or break the school boards where they educate their educators and the administrators go to their own class, like at the beginning of the year where the kids have the student handbook, they get the administrative handbook. And maybe it needs to be read out loud what kids can and can't do, in effect with free speech, in effect really with religion.
Well, again, Kelly's not here to defend himself, but I think he would like to see what we can do to educate. But if you were here yesterday, of course, we had some conversations as well about, again, the attempt here in this school district in Illinois is to hopefully get it resolved, but if not, go to court. And it just is amazing to me that in all these cases, a lot of them have to do with the fact that the Supreme Court decides not to decide. Going back to the other one, the Bladensburg Cross case, you know, Debbie, you and I would just say, well, didn't we decide that with the Mojave Cross case? Not really. The Supreme Court sort of dodged the issue. And if the Supreme Court would lay down the law, or we would get a lawsuit that would go all the way to the court and have very clear guidelines, maybe most of this would go away. But it's always the case that the court tries to, in many cases, not really address the issue and avoid issuing any kind of pronouncement that would kind of settle it once and for all.
They certainly do. There's a concept in a Supreme Court jurisprudence or an appellate court jurisprudence, especially at the federal level, where essentially you don't decide anything more than you absolutely have to. You don't you decide the issue before you, and you don't decide hypotheticals. And the courts avoid making broader statements than necessary. So, you know, they're going to find in this, if they were to take this Bladensburg Cross case, you'll probably never get a pronouncement out of the Supreme Court that says expressions of religious faith are permissible on public property. But you're not going to get that broad of a thing. You may say, you know, this in this case, or it is not a violation of the First Amendment, but they're very narrow with the good intent to not have overly broad statements made that later may encompass cases they didn't really mean to encompass.
And again, the other solution would be for Congress to pass something, but the last time Congress passed something dealing with religious liberty was the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which back then was something that even Ted Kennedy supported and I think was even sponsored by Chuck Schumer. But the last time somebody tried to pass a Religious Freedom Restoration Act in the state of Indiana, that was the former governor, now Vice President Mike Pence, he was vilified and pilloried. So I think it's getting more and more difficult to have any body, whether it's Congress whether it's the Supreme Court or federal courts, rule that religious liberty exists in America.
Absolutely. And part of that has to do politically with the extreme growth and determination of the LGBTQ advocates who are trying to advocate not just to be, left alone and not mistreated, but to trying to assert a right for their viewpoint about marriage and life and family to be normalized. And so the LGBT, and even, Bill Maher, the left-wing comic, refers to it as the LGBT mafia. I mean, they're just, so this is what happened to Governor and now Vice President Pence, just the unwillingness to have any recognition of Christian theology, which might in part imply that that you need to show respect for the Christian view of religion and marriage.
Let's take some more phone calls. We'll head to Arizona this time, KNLB. And Ed, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I've got two comments. The first one being, we've all driven the highways in the United States, and along the side of the road, people have put up crosses to commemorate the loss of their loved one. Does this mean a road grader is going to go and knock them all down? And also, all of the missions in Western states were established under religion. And now almost all of those old buildings are protected by the Historical Society, which gets government funding. Are all of those going to be torn down, one of which would be the Alamo?
You've really thought through some of those issues. Let's take them one at a time. Those crosses along the road, I think you would probably have tremendous outcry if somebody tried to do it, but I'm thinking that that's the next step. Kelly's not here right now, but one of the cases that they were dealing with was in Montana, where they wanted to take down a larger cross. It wasn't one of those smaller kind of roadside crosses. So the logic is consistent. That is, if you really wanted to expunge any kind of religious symbol from a public place, and it could be a roadway in your case, it could be a park in the case of San Diego, it could be a desert in the case of the Mojave Desert Cross, it could be the Arlington Cemetery. Those all, at least if you followed the logic to its logical extension, could actually be taken down. And then, you've been in California, I grew up in California, think of all those California missions, and they're receiving government funds. And, of course, they're not all that Christian anymore, and they're not missions. But, Ed, you've really got some good ideas there. That,
but it's a symbol.
Yeah, they're symbols. Go ahead.
Yeah. The other thing about... Please go ahead, Ed.
You just keep going. And what it is, it's not that they don't believe in God. It's that they hate God. They want to remove all representation of it.
I agree. The antagonism, the level of just belligerent intolerance that comes from many of these groups, it is beyond not. It is not just a noble and high-minded desire to have a society that respects all faiths or something and doesn't honor one over the other. It is a belligerent disdain for the idea of God. That is, in my sense of things, behind it. Back to the missions and those kind of public places. They are supported by tax dollars and maintained by them. And obviously, historically, they had roots in Christianity. Part of the reason that courts have found them to be permissible is because the presentation to the court is, well, this isn't really anymore a symbol of religion.
Right.
This
That's
is
how they get away with
history.
it.
It's historical.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, this is what I was saying when Kelly was here, too. I'm a little bit disappointed or frustrated about that because, well, I do think it's great that they found a basis that the courts would say, okay, this mission can still be here. I'd love to have the court say, and in addition, even if they were still holding services on Sunday mornings, that doesn't make it a violation of the Establishment Clause. We've got to get past this. We only can excuse these things if there's a historical argument behind it, because that just diminishes the First Amendment expression.
Reminds me of the reindeer argument. You remember in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, they said a nativity scene might be permissible as long as in addition to the nativity scene, it also had Santa and some reindeers.
Santa at the...
I'm more
Crush.
offended by that than the nativity scene that it so-called offends the atheist. But let's take a break. We've got a lot more phone calls. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one of the many dividing lines between progressives and conservatives is their belief in the efficiency and effectiveness of government bureaucracies. Liberals may have some misgivings about how they are treated at the Department of Motor Vehicles or by the TSA at airports. Nevertheless, they tend to believe that government is the solution to most social and political problems. Conservatives are usually more skeptical about government and support the private sector over the public sector, but their reactions seem tempered by the fact that they generally have high respect for people in the military and law enforcement. It's this difference in perspective concerning federal bureaucracies that shows up in many debates, including the current one about vetting refugees and other immigrants. In a recent column, Kevin Williamson asked, who seriously thinks that our public institutions are up to the job of properly investigating tens of thousands of refugees, asylum seekers, and ordinary immigrants every year? If Donald Trump's temporary order seems to you unreasonable, ask yourself what the next best option is and how much confidence we should have in it. When I read or hear someone assure us that the government screening of refugees and immigrants is very effective, I want to ask them some questions. Have you been to the DMV or the VA recently? Have you visited an immigration office recently? Sometimes you find a well-run organization, but far too often you probably walked out of a government building shaking your head because it was hardly run efficiently and effectively. Add to this the reality that the information from some of these countries for these refugees and immigrants is sketchy at best. That is why I think some are more trusting of the federal bureaucracy than is warranted. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, as a matter of fact, a minute ago we had all the lines full, but I think we do have a one open line. And in studio with me today, Debbie Georgatos, and we have a lot of other issues we can address, but if we don't get to those, we have posted those articles for you to join. But I want to hear from a few more of you as we've talked about everything from religious symbols. Some of you want to talk about the military. Those are all appropriate issues that we've dealt with so far, and we'll get into some of the others. As a matter of fact, we've posted some information about counterintelligence against Trump, how the judges rule that Trump and his Twitter account actually are a public forum, free health care for illegal immigrants, cop killer, and criminal justice reform. We may get to some of those. If not, they're posted for you to read, and we'll get to them next week or Sunday night when Debbie Georgatos deals with them. But let's head up to Missouri, KCMH. Oral, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Yeah, I just had a little input on these religious symbols.
Sure.
An obelisk is a religious symbol, and I see them in cemeteries all around. Even in our little town, there's about 4 or 5. If they want to fight religious symbols, then let's just push back and say the Washington Monument has to come down. Because that's
don't push
symbol.
this too far. You might give them ideas.
Well, I just think they ought to check into that and let the judges know. If they're going to open a can of worms, they better see how big that can is.
I'm afraid it's a bottomless pit at that point. Debbie, your thoughts? That's a great line. Oral, you get a good attaboy for that one today.
I like that. And actually, you may know, Kerby, I can't recall what it is, but in the Washington Monument,
yes,
there was carved near the top.
Laos Day.
Okay, I couldn't think of what it was. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea that this religious roots of America that are just woven into our history, our monuments, is all going to be removed at the pressure of these, frankly, leftist groups. It's just, I love your point, Oral. I love that you made that. Where does it end?
Yes. Well, and while we are talking about that, Stuart Shepard, who I mentioned just a minute ago, used to do the stoplight commentaries, and Kelly and I were just talking off air about one of the ones we love the most, and that's when we had President Obama say, we're really not that much of a Christian nation. So then he says, well, if the president walked out to the Washington Monument, and then, of course, on the very top is Laos Day, then he takes him over to the Jefferson Memorial, and then he takes him over to Congress, and then he takes him back, and you follow the pattern on the, and you can watch this on YouTube, it ends up in the shape of a cross. And so it's at the very end, he says, now look at that. And Stuart Shepard, just very creative. So again, that is just one more illustration. And again, if you want to take an obelisk, that is the Washington Monument for sure, and many of those others. So Oral, thank you for that. Let's keep moving since we got so many phone calls today. Nevada, KYCC. Ann, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Ann, are you there? I think we will put Ann on hold. Maybe she hasn't had a chance to get to her phones here. And we'll come back and see if we can pick up Ann. In the meantime, let's go to Texas, KCTA. Loretta, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but thank you for joining us today.
Hey, that's okay. My mom named me Loretta, and I get called lots of things that are illegal.
Well, I'm glad you joined us. What would you like to share?
I had to mix a little humor in there. Sir, it was so wonderful, and this is a wonderful time, like I was mentioned to the gentleman that answered, because I had two brothers in the Army, two brothers in the Marine Corps, and I was married to an Army soldier. So it does always hit close to home. And one of the things they always said, and I'm going to say it with much love and respect, maybe you remember the phrase that was kicked around a lot of times. They said about America, said, love it or leave it.
Yep, remember that? Yes.
And that's true more than ever. If we want to keep the America that God made great, then we're going to have to do it His way.
Well, and you heard all of these Hollywood celebrities that will say, you know, if such and such is elected, I'm going to leave the country. Saying,
promises.
Yeah. We'll let the door hit you on the way out. I mean, there have been times when there have been people in the presidency I've been thrilled about, people that have represented me in Congress that I haven't liked. Certainly, various statements made by Hollywood celebrities and politicians and others I didn't like. But you know, we've always had kind of a live and let live philosophy until now. And Debbie, I want to get back to the point you made just a minute ago. The LGBT community, until they really gained power, said, hey, we're just victims. We just want to be able to get married. That's all we want. And then the day they got that decision from the Supreme Court, they then wanted to use that to vilify anybody who disagreed with them. And we have cases before the Supreme Court right now. Let's just talk about one of those, Jack Phillips, a decision that will come down later in June. I'm almost say later this month because we're almost in June right now, but certainly by next month, in which we'll decide whether or not you have to force a baker in Colorado or the bakers in Oregon or anybody else, florists and all sorts of other individuals, force them to actually bake a cake for something that they disagree with, when they've had the freedom in the past to say, I'm not going to bake a cake for somebody that's celebrating a divorce. I'm not going to bake a cake for somebody that's a Satanist, but you have to bake a cake for somebody that is having a same-sex wedding. And if you don't, we will fine you hundreds of thousands of dollars and drive you out of business.
Well, it's funny you should mention, Loretta, about the love it or leave it expression, because it really does go. I use this expression on my radio show talking about the idea of America. There really is an identity, a cultural identity of America, and it's not like, being, it's not about race, it's not about ethnicity, it's not like being people who are Italian, have a historic and ethnicity as Italian. Or Greek or other ones, but America, the cultural identity of America is our values, is our founding ideas. That is the culture of America, open and available to everyone of every, race and background and skin color and whoever your family is. But part of that identity is a rooting in the Judeo-Christian ideas. That's what the identity of America is. And just like other nations are free to, in various parts of the world, free to found their nation on the teachings of Islam and to have Sharia written into their constitution, they can have that. But in America, we need to be clear about the identity of America is not secular. It is not about keeping God or faith out of the American public life. It is about having those values woven into what America is. And that is part of what this battle, to Kerby, to your point about the LGBT community, the argument that because we, through our courts and ultimately our society, have decided we're going to, we honor or we respect or we agree with the legal right to marry, does not mean we've surrendered our culture of, and to the cases you're talking about, a baker being told you either bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, even though that is offensive to your idea of marriage and your Christian faith. You either bake that cake or you're out of business. That is exalting the left-wing LGBTQ agenda above the identity and culture of America, and it really, just even if you don't want to say the culture of what Christians believe marriage is, it's at least against the idea of the absolute freedom of speech, to live, freedom of religion, and to live your freedom of religion and not be arm twisted by the government to lose your business if you won't go along with their view.
Let's go back to the phones in Georgia. WLPT and Shelton, thank you for calling today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, what would you like to share?
My daddy fought in Korea against the North Koreans and the Chinese in the Korean War. He was a Marine Corps. And all these people that wants to get rid of that monument that's been there 100 years, that cross, I think they ought to dig a trench by it before they do it and get all these atheists and fill it full of water, and then let them stay in that trench like them soldiers did over there in France against Germany. Let them sit in there and their feet about half rot off, and of course they ain't gonna be shooting mortars and poison gas, et cetera, but let them go through a little misery what them soldiers went through, and what my daddy went through in that cold Korea, and before they go to complaining about this, that's just retarded that they are complaining about a cross in the Arlington Cemetery. My daddy's he's on a monument up here in Jessup, Georgia.
Good. Yeah, and your point's well taken, and that is, just think, we've, of course, this weekend we will be honoring those who paid the ultimate sacrifice, who died, but what about those who survived and what they went through? And you read these stories, the Battle of the Bulge, what they went through when they fought in the Pacific battles in World War II. Of course, you're taking us all the way back to World War I, and every time I've studied that and what it must have been like to have been in the trenches and to have come out of the trenches and be shot at by machine guns and poison gas and on and on and on. And so many died, but then others survived, but they were blinded. They were amputees. They were wounded warriors. I'm going to a wounded warriors thing on Monday. Just unbelievable things that they went through. And so then somebody in the quietness and the comfort of their home say, I'm really offended because as I drive on that freeway, I see that cross, and that bothers me so much. Well, I see all sorts of things that bother me. As a matter of fact, I'm told many times, Debbie, that if I see an advertisement for a porno shop, I'm just supposed to avert my eyes. But I'm not allowed to, if I'm an atheist, avert my eyes from a cross that celebrates those who died for my freedom. I'm sorry, I just don't have a lot of sympathy for that. So, Sheldon, you win an award for that as well. But we need to take a break. We'll come back with more phone calls right after this.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos with us, and Kelly Shackelford is back. I thought that we would not see you till at least a week, and here you are. So, again, the event you were going to was canceled, so he actually did a U-turn and came back. So that means a lot that you'd come, because some of these questions are related to you. So let's get to one of those. Steve in California, I think you wanted to talk about crosses, so go for it.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you this afternoon?
We are good.
Hey, I thought I'd share something with you. We have 4 funeral homes in Southern California and 4 in South Carolina, and we gladly will take a indigent or homeless person who has passed away and bury them at our expense from the city at no expense to them. However, with each spot, we go ahead and put a small cross up in the hopes that the good Lord has been watching over them. So the question I've got is that since the cities are more than willing to accept our generosity of interning some of their indigents or those who can't pay at no cost to the city, does that mean that I'm going to have to go back into our cemeteries and yank down all of the crosses that we have put up at our expense on behalf of the city?
Yeah, that's a fascinating one there. I would say...
My answer is I'm not taking them down anyway, but there's a kind of interesting situation, right?
No, it is. Probably what I would have done, and by the way, you can call our office if you want to after this as ways maybe you might protect yourself, but is make clear that this property, this cemetery is your cemetery, and that you're willing to bury these people, but it is your cemetery. It's not their plot, because
we've been doing it for 5 years.
Well, here's what I worry about. I worry about a family member coming up later and saying that's his burial plot or her burial plot, and we don't want to cross there, and doing something along those lines. And so, but if it's yours, and then when the city gives it to you, they know that you're doing something, but you're putting it on your property, is your burial spots, you're not giving those away. You're just burying somebody there and honoring them. It might make you in a better shape. But yeah, that's the kind of thing, believe it or not, that's kind of nutty stuff that these days people, try to do, is make trouble for people who are doing good things because they do it out of faith. They have a cross or a symbol, and they want to try to cause trouble for the people who are doing. I mean, think of Coach Joe Kennedy, one of the most well-known cases we have in the country, a coach who was fired for going to a knee after the football game to do what? To give thanks to God for the privilege of coaching the young men. He has such a heart for these guys that the local editorial writer for the Seattle newspaper wrote, "I'm an agnostic, but if my child was old enough, this is the coach I would want. And yet this is the guy we're firing because he's the type of guy that would go to a knee after the football game to give thanks because he wants to remember that this is a privilege from God that he gets to actually build into these young men's lives." It just shows you how backwards things are. So the caller's like, he's doing a great thing, and but that doesn't mean that somebody's not going to try to cause him trouble. And I hope never so. And if they do, call us. We'll be glad to help him. And if even if he wants to call beforehand and, hey, get some advice on how to protect himself. But once you have the government involved, somebody can try to make trouble. They just can, and they can try to say you can't have any religious aspects.
Well, first, Steve, I wanted to say that's a really beautiful thing you do. I think it's lovely, and thank you for doing that. Just fabulous that you do that for these people. And the other thought about it is that I wouldn't tell anybody. No, that's not right. Why are you telling us? No. But on a serious note, it's a great example of how absurd it would be, which goes to a previous caller's point, the efforts behind these anti-Christian groups who file lawsuits and threaten things is not respect for diversity of views. It is utter antagonism to the idea of God and how much God matters to other Americans. It's utter anger at the belief in God.
Well, the funny thing is, I will tell you that our attorneys, and I know we all kind of kid about lawyers in general, but our attorneys have a great packet, and that's that if anybody comes along that is a member of that family that we've interred and is upset, we will gladly remove the cross after we present them the bill for the internment and the perpetual care that has been accrued.
That's right. That's right.
Sounds fair to me.
I mean, I thought you were going to say as long as they dig him up and carry him and put him somewhere else.
You guys have a good weekend.
They do.
You too.
Gotta love a funeral owner with a sense of humor, too. Don't you love that one? Let's take some more phone calls. In the first hour, we did spend a little bit of time talking about the Trump investigation, Paul Manafort, and, of course, Robert Mueller, as well as, so-called Spygate. And we have a call about that, so let's go out to California. David, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kerby. And your guest, I was definitely interested in Manafort. There was his mentor was a guy named Roy Cohn, C-O-H-N, and Roy Cohn is kind of famous from back in the 50s. He was the sidekick for Joe McCarthy.
Yes.
But after Joe McCarthy died, Roy Cohn went back to New York City. He owned the legal newspaper in New York City, so he was able to basically write editorials against judges and prosecutors, and he was able to control the legal world through his smear editorials in the legal newspaper. And so he gained control of New York politics that way, and in doing so, then he started becoming the attorney for a bunch of organized crime families. So he actually was famous for having business meetings for organized crime in his office. And if they ever got raided, then Roy Cohn was going to claim that it was an attorney-client privilege.
Privilege, yeah, all protected.
So when you start looking at Manafort, Roger Stone, Dick Morris, and Donald Trump, they were all palling around with Roy Cohn for the last 15 years of his life. In fact, I think Manafort and Stone were much earlier with Trump. So these guys are organized crime. Their technique is identical to what he was doing with having the mob meetings in his room, and now he's got the gall to try to get our investigators to give him the evidence so he can destroy it. So this is a play of organized crime trying to control the U.S. government. And if you ever think something can go bad, try having organized crime running your world. And
I think there was equal amounts of that. I see the techniques you're describing, for instance, were exactly what the Clinton administration did. They had people on Hillary's team who were also, quote, her attorneys, so that it was attorney-client privilege. If you'll remember, during her investigation, they pulled the same kind of techniques. And obviously the Clinton, situation goes back all the way to Arkansas. A lot of stuff going on. So, I just think as this goes, I think there's a lot of, anybody who is Donald Trump's position in New York probably has relationships with all kinds of people. That,
some pretty unsavory, too.
And so
true.
none of that surprises, I think, anybody. That's the thing. It's kind of baked into the cake. I think part of the reason he was elected was because he had to deal in a very difficult place, and he had the ability to kind of, break through all that and actually get some things done. And I think people felt like Congress was worse than the mafia. I mean, they just sit there every year. They get reelected. They don't do what they promise. They control everything and the establishment. And I think people were ready to blow the place up. And you know what? It's kind of happened. And when you look at a lot of things that have happened, so, it doesn't surprise me. I do think we've got to be very careful. This idea of using the way things work, I love our founders are so smart. We set up a process for getting rid of a president. It's not having the FBI investigate them. Okay, that's not the process. If we're going to do that, we're going to do that every time. The other side's going to come up. They're going to demand an independent counsel. We're going to have the president drug through all this stuff, whatever you want to charge next time. And it's the criminalization of politics, and it's really unhealthy for our country. The way you do things is you vote them out the next time if you don't like them, and if you feel like they're doing something that's impeachable, you impeach them. But what we're doing now is really, I think, not healthy.
Take a break. Take some more phone calls right after this.
The Me Too movement is curtailing sexual predation in the workplace, but it has a growing destructive component. Institutions across society are doing all they can to make certain the term all-white male could never be used to describe them. Journalist, attorney, and Manhattan Institute fellow Heather McDonald spoke about this to students and faculty at Hillsdale College. She warned, and I'm quoting her, "Me Too is going to unleash a new torrent of gender and race quotas throughout the economy, on the theory that all disparities in employment and institutional representation are due to harassment and bias." She says American competitiveness and scientific achievement will suffer. She points out that diversity and inclusion were top themes at the World Economic Forum, chaired exclusively by women this year. CEOs revealed that a key determinant of managers' pay levels is now their record of hiring and promoting females and minorities. There's a war on merit. Criticizing it can get you fired. Just ask James Danmore, famously fired by Google last year for writing a memo suggesting that bias is not to blame for the fact that tech companies aren't employing men and women at 50-50 rates. He cited research showing that men and women are attracted to and prepare for different types of work. Saying this supposedly risked traumatizing female Google employees. But the attention, including billions of dollars, paid to attract women into the hard sciences is not paying off. Ms. McDonald told the crowd at Hillsdale, "This is not surprising, given mounting evidence of the differences in interests and aptitudes between the sexes. Females usually seek jobs that are seen as directly helping others by a 2-to-1 ratio over males. But mainstream institutions in our society, Hollywood, business, banking, Silicon Valley, and certainly academia, are turning themselves into pretzels to prefer diversity over aptitude, sacrificing excellence." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and again, we want to certainly honor those who have fought in the war, those who have died, and as we come to Memorial Day weekend, I wanted to take another call that relates to that. We'll head out to Nevada this time, listening on KYCC. Ann, thank you for joining our conversation. What's your point of view?
Well, to be honest with you, it's pretty exciting to me that I got to come and help take care of my dad, who had served in the Navy in Korea. And one day I was helping him, and as I was wheeling, he was in a wheelchair. And literally, as I was wheeling him into his bedroom, he said, "Yeshua, Son of God." It's special to me to serve God and to serve the Lord Jesus Christ, God the Father, Spirit, and Sonship, Holy Spirit of God in love. And it was an opportunity for me to care for my dad. He served in Korea during Incheon. And along with that, you know, I hear a lot of different views and stuff, and there is a lot of unwanted, wrong animosity, and it gets quite frustrating. But I want to share this with you. As I was listening, I just really am compelled to share what Jesus wants us to do. And I believe we need to come back to our first love, Jesus Christ. And that is in secular positions. And it shouldn't be secular in a government agency because we're supposed to be serving God, you know. And to me, I believe I want to ask for Holy Spirit discernment of when to share and how much to share, because God calls us to be quiet and not throw our pearls before swine. And as far as the cross is concerned, I'm going to honor the cross of Christ. The Word of God says, I honor the God who holds in his hand my life in all my ways, and I commit myself to my faithful Creator, and I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And it's a special opportunity to be allowed to share for people in the midst of difficult situations. And that's where I'm coming from. Even my own family at this time isn't listening, but that doesn't mean they're not going to. I believe it's important for me to share, and I do share.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Just any comments around the round table before we kind of wind down the program today?
I think you have a heart like a lot of Americans. I think you sound like how a lot of Americans feel about their country and about what they expect to see as expression of faith in their country. And thank you for all you're doing for your dad.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reason that at First Liberty Institute, the reason I do what I do is so people can share. You know, there's another ministry, East West Ministry. There's a friend of mine, John Maisel, that was the head of that. Now it's Kurt Nelson. But they go into countries where it's illegal to share the gospel. And I kind of look at them and I say, if I ever fail in my job, then it'll be your job in the United States. And that's really the way I see it is if there are not people out there sharing, then what am I doing?
Yeah.
You know, and so over Memorial Day, I see things like, you know, mentioned earlier, the Bladensburg Cross and the Veterans Memorial. You know, we've got all the Facebook posts and the memes, and they're so excellently done. It's a great way to sort of bridge a conversation with somebody, because even people who aren't, you know, Christian are still going to say, you know, that's a good Veterans Memorial. That shouldn't be torn down. That would be horrible. But it allows you to begin a conversation and a relationship that where you can even talk about faith and Christianity and the cross. And so I think all those things are great opportunities. And like she said, I mean, you just got to listen to when to speak and when not to speak. And I think listening is very important. I think not only listening to what they're saying, but listening to what God is moving you to do in each situation.
Yeah, I use this. I love that passage. I don't know which translation of the Bible it is in the Old Testament, but it's God talking to Moses who's saying, I can't go talk to the Pharaoh, and I can't do this. And he says, you know, I'll be with thy mouth and tell thee what thou shalt say. That might be the original King James. But whatever it is, the idea of it's right with you, it's right there with you. And that sharing, I've noticed too, it's very comfortable in America as we have secularization pushed so much, it's very comfortable to make this secular argument on many, many issues and just try to make an argument that doesn't relate to your faith. But I find so often if I or someone else says something, but this isn't really consistent with Christian faith, or that other people say, yeah, that's right. They're kind of waiting for someone else to do it, and then they'll chime in. I think people appreciate the ones who, when you're led and you feel like it's clear to do, it really blesses everyone, the whole conversation, and often people will chime in and agree.
Mm. Well, again, just before we run out of time, let's talk about a couple of resources. I'm going to go to Debbie second because I want to talk about a radio show. But Kelly, some people maybe did not have a chance to hear about how this could be a real concern, that this might be the last memorial service at Bladensburg Cross. And as soon as that video is available through you, we'll put it on our website, and it'll be on your website. But talk about what's happening this weekend and why people need to be in prayer.
Well, it's Memorial Day weekend, and the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial, which has been up for 100 years and was put up in part by Gold Star moms, mothers who lost their sons in the war, is currently slated to be unconstitutional. And so we're going to be going to the Supreme Court to get that overturned. But if it's not, I mean, this literally could be the last year that this Veterans Memorial will be up, and it's been up for 100 years. All the pictures and the little memes and everything is available. Easiest way is either go to pointofview.net and then link to Liberty, but you can go to firstliberty.org and you spell it out first. And at the top, it'll have a Twitter, it'll have a Facebook. You can click and go to those things. You can see the pictures, and you can share those with other people and start talking about the issue, because most people have no idea this is happening. So that's what I would say this weekend, a great way. And then if you're following, for instance, on Twitter or you're on Facebook and you're connected to First Liberty Institute, when the video comes out, you'll get it. And that way you can be in the know on what's happening. And you could also follow the valedictorian case, Sam Blackledge, and what happens in that as you know, subsequently there'll be updates and things as we're going along, in addition to all the other cases that we're doing.
And also, Debbie, let's talk about AmericaCanWeTalk.org. First of all, you can listen to previous interviews. I know you did one just recently with Dr. Kelly Ward, a U.S. Senate candidate, and all sorts of other interviews you've done. But even this Sunday, there'll be a chance to hear some of the things we talked about today here on Point of View.
I'll tell your listeners that we always joke off. We're not on radio. If I join the roundtable on Friday, it's kind of show prep for Sunday. But my show is called America Can We Talk, and you can listen to it. And if you're on Facebook Live, you can go to AmericaCanWeTalk.org. We put it out Facebook Live. It's 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time on Sunday evenings. And you can listen if you go to AmericaCanWeTalk.org. You can click on Listen Live. This Sunday, I have in the second hour, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West joining me. We're going to kind of talk about Memorial Day and some of the cases involving soldiers who have been, who are facing prosecution themselves. And then the first hour, we'll probably talk a lot about some of the cases we talked about here today. I want to get on to the First Amendment and the NFL case. I want to talk a little bit about, it's not a First Amendment. It's not a First Amendment issue, in my opinion, but I would talk about that. And now that Kelly has prompted me, I'm going to do further research on what I think about President Trump and his Twitter account.
That's for sure.
But yeah, we just talk about preserving the unique, extraordinary idea that is America.
And what it means to be an American. And
absolutely.
So, yes. Let me just mention before we wind down today, the one of the things we've asked for you to do is to share your story this week. And there is a banner there that says, share your story, begin here. And of course, you've heard Kelly's story about listening to Point of View. And you've heard my friend Jeremy Dice listening to it in the van while he's waiting for his sister to finish a music lesson. We'd like to know your story. Perhaps this listening to Point of View has caused you to run for office, or maybe start a pregnancy resource center, start a school, or maybe it hasn't been that dramatic. Maybe you just decided to finally register to vote and go out and vote, or begin to speak out on these issues. So again, we'd love to hear your story. If you indeed give us your story, we will send you as a thank you the Bible stick, and it will also enter you into a drawing to receive a iPad mini. So that's our way of saying thank you for sharing your story about Point of View. So that's something you could be doing over the weekend, and hope you'll consider doing it. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help. Next week, we have Congressman Pete Sessions in studio with us. Brad Dacus will be with us. We'll be talking with Michelle Rigby-Assad, the Bond girl, all sorts of things. And that's all happening next week. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. See you back here on Monday.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.